Hi there. Welcome back to Haunting Vales. Today, we are going to talk about the curse of the Ebony Spear, an ancient relic whispered to bring death to those who possess it. And when it falls into the wrong hands, only Sherlock Holmes can untangle the mystery. So, light the lanterns, step carefully into the shadows, and join us as we uncover the truth. Chapter 1. The Visitor in the Fog. London lay smothered under a heavy fog that clung to the gaslit streets like a damp shroud, muffling the sound of carriage wheels and swallowing the outlines of buildings until they seemed like pale phantoms adrift in a sea of gray. The hour was late, just past 11 on a November night, and Baker Street was unusually silent, save for the occasional clip-clop of a hansom cab navigating blindly through the mist. Inside our lodgings at 221B, however, there was no silence. The crackle of the fireplace, the faint scratch of my pen across the paper, and, above all, the restless movements of Sherlock Holmes filled the air with the unmistakable sense that the night was not yet finished with us. Holmes was pacing the length of the carpet, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin, his sharp eyes distant, lost in some private deduction that had taken root in his mind since the late afternoon. He wore his dressing gown of gray flannel, but even in such homely attire, he possessed a wiry energy, a tension in every movement, like a violin string wound too tightly. I, for my part, had been attempting to compose notes on a recent case concerning a forgery in South Kensington, but Holmes's agitated pacing proved too great a distraction. "It is coming, Watson," Holmes suddenly declared, his voice cutting through the room with startling clarity that I looked up from my writing desk. "What is coming?" "Fate," he replied, with that curious blend of seriousness and mischief that always unsettled me. "It knocks even now." And as though to prove his point, there came a sharp rap at the door below, muffled by the fog outside, but distinct enough to make Mrs. Hudson stir in her quarters. Holmes halted, listening with a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Late calls, Watson, are seldom of the trivial variety. Let us prepare ourselves." Moments later, Mrs. Hudson ushered in a visitor. He emerged from the fog as if conjured from it. A tall, gaunt man, his shoulders stooped and his breath uneven. His greatcoat damp with moisture and his hat clutched nervously in his gloved hands. His face was pale, drawn, with eyes that darted about the room as though even the warm lamplight of Baker Street could not provide him safety. "Mr. Holmes," the stranger began, his voice trembling slightly. "I beg your pardon for intruding at such an hour, but I had nowhere else to turn." Holmes extended a hand toward the armchair near the fire. "Pray sit, and compose yourself. You are among friends here. This is my associate, Dr. Watson, whose discretion is equal to his medical skill." The man inclined his head briefly toward me before lowering himself into the chair, his long fingers twitching on his knees as if unable to be still. I could see at once that he was a man of breeding. His clothing, though travel-worn, was of fine cut, and there was a refinement in his features that spoke of education and position. Yet there was also a haunted quality in his eyes, the kind I had seen in soldiers who had survived terrible campaigns. "My name is Sir Reginald Lockwood," he said after a moment, "Baronet of Westmarch. God forgive me, I come to you not with a matter of crime, but of a curse." Holmes's expression remained unchanged, but I, knowing his skepticism in such matters, half expected a dismissive remark. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, his keen gaze fixed upon the man. "A curse, you say? You must enlighten us, Sir Reginald. For a man of your station to brave the streets of London at this hour suggests that what you carry is no trifling superstition." The baronet swallowed hard, then drew from the folds of his coat a long bundle wrapped in heavy cloth. He laid it across his knees with a kind of reverence and dread combined. As he unwrapped the layers, the firelight caught upon an object that made me start involuntarily. It was a spear, but no ordinary weapon of war. The shaft was of dark ebony wood, polished to an unnatural sheen, almost black as midnight, with curious carvings etched along its length, symbols unfamiliar to me and distinctly unsettling in their alien geometry. The spearhead was broad, forged from some metal darker than iron, its edges glimmering faintly as though it drank in the firelight rather than reflected it. And upon its blade, faint stains marred the surface, stains the color of rust, but too deep, too dark, too organic. Holmes did not move for a long moment. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, studied the weapon with an intensity that seemed to draw the very air from the room. Then, with careful precision, he reached forward and lifted the spear, holding it lightly in his hands, turning it this way and that. "A remarkable piece," he murmured. "African, I should think. Perhaps West African. The craftsmanship is extraordinary, and these markings." He paused, tracing the carvings with a fingertip. "They are not decorative alone. They suggest ritual, perhaps religious significance." Sir Reginald's face blanched. "You are correct, Mr. Holmes. It is no mere relic. It is the Ebony Spear, an artifact seized during my grandfather's campaign along the Niger Delta. He brought it back with him to England in 1852. And since that time, the Lockwood family has known nothing but tragedy." At this, Holmes's eyes flicked up sharply. "Explain." The baronet drew a deep breath, his voice low, almost conspiratorial, as though the fog outside might overhear. "My grandfather died within a year of bringing it home, struck down by fever that no physician could name. My uncle, who inherited it, fell upon the blade during a hunting accident, though those present swore he was nowhere near it when he fell. My father drowned in his own estate pond. And now," his voice broke, and he pressed a hand to his temple, "now I have begun to see things. Shadows moving in my home, faces in mirrors, whispers in the night that speak in a tongue I do not understand. I fear, Mr. Holmes, that the spear has marked me as it marked them, that I am next." The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the hiss of the fire. I felt a chill creep along my spine despite the warmth of the room, for there was an undeniable conviction in Sir Reginald's words, a terror that could not easily be dismissed as fancy. Holmes, however, leaned back in his chair, the spear still balanced in his hands. His expression was unreadable, though I saw in his eyes a flicker of something, excitement, perhaps, or challenge. "You believe this object carries a curse," he said softly, "and yet you brought it here, into my rooms." "I had no choice," the baronet cried. "Already I feel it closing in upon me. I thought, foolishly perhaps, that if anyone could unravel such a horror, it would be you. I beg of you, Mr. Holmes, rid me of this doom." Holmes rose, carrying the spear to the mantel, where he laid it carefully, as though wary of disturbing its dark equilibrium. He turned, his lean figure outlined by the firelight, and his voice, when he spoke, carried the authority of a man already committed. "Sir Reginald," he said, "you have done right to come to me. I make no promises of curses or of spirits, but there is always a pattern, always a chain of cause and effect, however hidden it may be beneath superstition. I shall examine this matter with all the resources at my disposal." Sir Reginald's shoulders sagged with visible relief, though his eyes still flicked nervously toward the spear. Holmes glanced toward me. "Watson, I believe we have before us a puzzle of uncommon nature. A family line shadowed by death, an artifact steeped in mystery, and a man who believes himself doomed. Tell me, my dear fellow, what could be more invigorating?" And though I wished to match his enthusiasm, I confess that, as the fog pressed closer against the windows and the fire guttered low, a cold foreboding settled over me. For I could not shake the feeling that Sir Reginald Lockwood had indeed brought more than a mere object into our rooms that night. He had brought the shadow of death itself. Chapter 2: Shadows over Bloomsbury. The morning after Sir Reginald Carstairs' visit found Baker Street unusually still. Outside, a fine drizzle clung to the window panes, and the fog from the night before had thickened into a pale gray shroud over London. Holmes had risen before dawn, as was his custom when a new case pressed on his mind, and I found him seated at the table, his eyes fixed intently on the single item which lay upon it, the fragment of parchment Sir Reginald had left behind. The crude sketch of the spear, surrounded by jagged symbols, looked faintly menacing in the dim light. Holmes had been at it for hours, studying it with that relentless focus which made him, at times, appear scarcely human. He had filled 2 pages of notes already, though when I asked him whether he had made progress, he only replied with a brief shake of his head and the words, "Patience, Watson. Patterns reveal themselves only to those willing to wait." By midday, the doorbell rang, and Mrs. Hudson appeared at the sitting-room threshold with an air of solemnity. "A gentleman to see you, Mr. Holmes," she announced. A tall figure entered, his umbrella dripping, his overcoat streaked with rain. He introduced himself as Inspector Gregson of Scotland Yard, a familiar colleague whose path had often crossed with Holmes in the past. Gregson looked harried, his eyes betraying a night without rest. He wasted no time in pleasantries. "Holmes, I assume you've heard of the incident in Bloomsbury?" Holmes gestured for him to sit and replied simply, "We've heard only whispers. Tell me." Gregson leaned forward, lowering his voice as though fearful the fog itself might be listening. "A man was found dead at his residence near Bloomsbury Square. A certain Professor Elliot, specialist in antiquities, particularly artifacts from the African continent. His death appears unnatural." At this, Holmes raised an eyebrow. "Unnatural in what sense?" "No sign of forced entry, no robbery. Yet the body was discovered sprawled across his study floor. And here's the detail that makes the case worthy of your attention. Clutched in his hand was a broken spearhead of black wood, and on his wall, written in a strange, red substance, were markings not unlike those you see there." Gregson pointed to the parchment. The likeness was undeniable, the jagged symbols, near identical to those Sir Reginald had shown us. My blood ran cold at the realization. Holmes, however, betrayed no such emotion. He folded his long fingers together and said, almost with satisfaction, "Then it has begun. The curse is not content with superstition. It claims its victims in flesh." We departed Baker Street within the hour, a hansom cab carrying us through the rain-slicked streets. Toward Bloomsbury. The city seemed unusually tense that day. Street vendors called half-heartedly. Passers-by kept their collars turned high. When we arrived at the professor's townhouse, a constable stood guard by the steps, his expression pale and uneasy. Inside, the air was heavy with the metallic tang of something unpleasant. The study itself bore the unmistakable air of disorder. A chair overturned, books scattered across the carpet, and in the center of it all, the lifeless form of Professor Elliot, his spectacles broken beside him. The spearhead lay only inches away, its ebony surface gleaming as though freshly polished. On the far wall, drawn in jagged strokes, were the same runic marks. They seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light, though I told myself this must have been an illusion born of nerves. Holmes moved silently around the room, every detail falling beneath his gaze. He crouched by the professor's body, noting the expression of terror frozen on the man's features. "No wound," Holmes murmured. "No sign of struggle. Yet death has visited him swiftly." He examined the spearhead without touching it, then motioned for me to observe the wall. The markings, close at hand, were indeed painted in something dark and dried. "Blood," I whispered. Holmes leaned in. "Possibly, but not human." He stood, his eyes narrowing. "Gregson, who first discovered the body. His housekeeper. Arrived this morning, found him like this. She's downstairs, nearly hysterical." Holmes nodded. "We shall speak with her presently. But first, this spearhead." It is no ordinary relic. Watson, look here. He pointed to the edge where would met what appeared to be a faintly metallic inlay. This weapon is both ceremonial and practical. The inlay suggests a tribe familiar with metallurgy, but the wood, ebony, hard, unyielding, often symbolic of death in certain cultures. As Holmes spoke, I could not shake the image of Sir Reginald's haunted expression from the night before. The curse, he had said, was real, and here lay a man who seemed to have fallen victim to it. Holmes, however, was not content with superstition. His eyes darted across the floorboards, the window frame, the fireplace. At last, he crouched again by the spearhead, producing a magnifying lens from his pocket. "Ah," he murmured, "here lies the thread." He gestured for me to look. On the spearhead's surface were tiny scratches, recent and irregular. This spearhead was forced into his hand, Holmes deduced. Post-mortem, most likely. And these symbols upon the wall, they are not drawn with a steady hand. They are meant to frighten, to suggest ritual. But I tell you, Watson, they are the work of a man, not of a curse. Before I could respond, the housekeeper was ushered in, trembling. Through her tears, she explained that Professor Elliot had been disturbed for weeks. He said something followed him, she whispered. Something from the museum. He would not speak of it, but he grew pale, nervous. Last night, I heard footsteps in the hall, though I knew he was alone. I dared not investigate. Holmes questioned her further, but her knowledge was limited. Still, her words confirmed what Holmes had already suspected. This death was not random, but the continuation of a chain linked by the Ebony Spear. We left the townhouse as evening fell, the fog closing around us once more. Holmes was silent during the cab ride back, his gaze fixed outward as if deciphering patterns invisible to ordinary eyes. At last, he spoke. Two men connected to the spear. Two deaths, one past and one present, and both surrounded by symbols, meant to invoke fear. The question is not whether the curse is real, Watson, but who among the living seeks to make it appear so. He paused, his voice hardening. And more importantly, who shall be next? That night at Baker Street, Holmes worked late into the hours, consulting his volumes on African cultures and ancient rites. I watched him trace lines between names, places, and objects, until finally he stopped, his finger resting on a passage within an obscure ethnographic text. "Here it is," he said softly. "The spear belongs to the Bakongo people. Among them, ebony is not merely a wood but a vessel of spirits. The spear was said to bind oath-breakers to death. A powerful legend, to be sure, but in the wrong hands, it becomes a weapon far deadlier than any superstition. Someone is exploiting this legend, Watson, and I intend to uncover who." Sleep came poorly to me that night, for I could not rid my mind of the professor's twisted features and the dark spear glinting in his lifeless hand. Somewhere in London, I knew, the shadow of the Ebony Spear lingered still, and Holmes, my ever-relentless friend, was already plotting his next move against it. Chapter 3. The Web of Shadows. The days that followed were unlike any Holmes and I had known in recent investigations, for rarely had we encountered a case that spread its tendrils so far, winding through fog and fear, through whispers and ancient echoes, through the very fabric of London's underbelly. The Ebony Spear was no ordinary relic. It had become a catalyst, drawing men of greed, power, and superstition into its orbit, and with each step forward, Holmes seemed to be pursuing not merely a thief, nor even a murderer, but something woven deep into human weakness itself. Our morning began as usual, with Holmes rising before the sun to pore over newspapers and foreign journals delivered overnight. I, bleary-eyed from restless dreams haunted by the image of that spear gleaming black against firelight, descended to find Holmes pacing the sitting-room floor at Baker Street, his pipe clamped between his teeth and the room hazy with smoke. On the table, spread open, lay maps of London, letters in coded scripts, and a peculiar charcoal rubbing that Holmes had managed to obtain of the Spear's etchings. "Watson," he began briskly, without preamble, "observe the markings upon this rubbing. What do you make of them?" I bent over the paper, tracing the strange, angular figures with my eyes. They were not letters of any tongue I knew. Sharp strokes, curved hooks, a rhythm that suggested intention, yet eluded comprehension. They seem primitive, perhaps hieroglyphic. I ventured. Holmes tapped the ash from his pipe into the grate. Indeed, hieroglyphic, but not Egyptian. These belong to the lost tongues of Nubia, regions that fell under both Egyptian and Roman conquest, but retain their own script. Observe here. This symbol resembles the sign for death, and this for water. And here, Watson, do you see this repetition? I nodded. 3 jagged lines, interspersed with dots. Precisely, Holmes continued. This pattern occurs not once or twice, but in nearly every instance on the spear's shaft. A talismanic inscription, perhaps, repeated to ensure its power. Whoever fashioned this relic imbued it with significance, and whoever covets it today is driven as much by superstition as by greed. I shuddered slightly, recalling the lifeless eyes of the museum guard and the strange hush that had followed in the wake of the spear's disappearance. "And you believe, Holmes, that this is no mere burglary, that it is cultic?" Holmes smiled faintly. "Ah, Watson, your instincts grow sharper with each case. Yes, I suspect a cult or sect lies behind this theft, one with ancient ties. And as fate would have it, I have arranged for us to attend a most curious gathering tonight." Before I could inquire further, a sharp knock sounded at the door. Mrs. Hudson entered, flustered, bearing a letter sealed in black wax. Holmes tore it open, scanned its contents, and handed it to me without a word. The letter was brief, written in a slanted hand. "Leave the matter of the Ebony Spear to those to whom it rightfully belongs. Persist, and London will weep blood. Consider this your final warning." There was no signature, only a crude symbol at the bottom. The same jagged pattern Holmes had shown me moments before. That Holmes' eyes glittered with amusement rather than alarm. "They have shown their hand, Watson, and in doing so, revealed more than they intended." "How so?" I asked. "Because threats are a sign of desperation. If they were confident of their hold, they would act without warning. This means we are close, dangerously close, to unmasking them." That evening found us in the shadowed heart of Limehouse, the fog rolling thick off the Thames, carrying with it the mingled scents of fish, coal, and the faint sweetness of opium. Holmes led us down a narrow alley, its cobbles slick with rain, until we arrived at a low doorway marked by a lantern of crimson glass. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with smoke and murmurs. Men of every description crowded the dim hall: sailors, dock workers, merchants, and a few gentlemen whose attire betrayed wealth, but whose faces remained half hidden beneath their hats. Holmes whispered, "This, Watson, is no mere den of vice. It is a meeting place, a nexus where information flows like wine. Listen closely, and you shall hear the truth." We took a table in the corner, ordering tea that was never brought, and allowed the hours to unfold. Fragments of conversation drifted through the air, talk of ships from Alexandria, of relics bound for private collections, of strange ceremonies held beneath abandoned warehouses. At length, a hush fell, and all eyes turned toward a figure who had entered silently through a side door. He was tall, robed in dark cloth, his face obscured by a hood. With deliberate grace, he set upon the table before him a long parcel wrapped in linen. As he unwrapped it, the crowd leaned forward, breaths caught, eyes wide. There, gleaming in the lamplight, was the ebony spear. That a ripple of awe spread through the room. Some murmured prayers in foreign tongues, others bowed their heads. The hooded man raised the weapon aloft, and his voice carried across the hall with an authority that chilled me. "Behold," he declared, "the spear of eternity, torn from the hands of our ancestors, profaned by unbelievers, but now restored. With it, we shall reclaim what was lost." Holmes gripped my arm subtly. Note, Watson, the way he phrases his words, not as one man, but as the mouthpiece of many. He is a priest, a leader of this sect. The man continued, speaking of ancient curses, of vengeance upon those who defied their claim. As he did, Holmes' keen eyes scanned the crowd, his mind noting every face, every gesture. At last, the speech concluded, and the spear was concealed once more. Holmes leaned close. "We must follow." Quietly, the leader slipped from the hall, flanked by two men. Holmes and I shadowed them through twisting alleys, our footsteps masked by the fog. They crossed into the docklands, where a warehouse loomed against the night sky. Inside, through a gap in the boards, we observed a scene that chilled the marrow. Candles arranged in a circle, chanting in a forgotten tongue, and at the center, the spear laid upon a black cloth as if upon an altar. Holmes whispered, "We are witnessing an invocation, a ritual meant to bind power to the spear or release it. Either way, we cannot allow them to proceed." I asked in a hushed voice, "What can we do?" "There are too many." Holmes' hand closed upon my shoulder. "Patience. Observe. Knowledge, Watson, is the true weapon. We shall strike not with force, but with understanding. Let them reveal themselves, and then we shall unravel their design." And so we watched, the hours crawling by, as the cult performed its rites. At last, the leader spoke words that needed no translation. "With this spear, we curse our enemies. With this spear, we shall bring nations to their knees. Let none defy us, for death shall follow." Holmes' eyes narrowed. "Now, Watson, we understand. Their aim is not merely the possession of a relic, but the wielding of fear as power. If London believes the curse is real, these men gain dominion without ever lifting a blade." The ritual ended, the cult dispersed, and Holmes drew me away into the night. Only once we reached the safety of Baker Street did he allow his own intensity to relax. "This, my dear Watson," he said, sinking into his chair, "is the web of shadows in which we are entangled. The ebony spear is not cursed by ancient magic. It is cursed by human ambition. And ambition, I fear, may prove deadlier than any superstition." But even as he spoke, I could not shake the memory of the chanting voices, nor the sight of that dark weapon gleaming in the circle of candlelight. Whether superstition or truth, the spear had claimed the devotion of many, and as Holmes had often warned me, the belief in a curse can kill as surely as the curse itself. Chapter 4: The Shadows of Betrayal. The fire burned low in Baker Street. A pale haze of smoke drifted through the sitting room, curling around the brass lamp that Sherlock Holmes had positioned near his chair. Outside, the fog pressed against the window panes like a living thing, eager to seep into the warmth of our chamber. It was well past midnight, yet neither of us entertained thoughts of sleep. The ebony spear, its curse, and its growing trail of death had claimed every corner of our minds. Holmes sat still, his fingers pressed together, his eyes fixed upon the glowing coal at the end of his pipe. I knew that when he reached this state, his brain was dissecting details that most men would never even register. "Watson," he said, quietly at last, "the spear itself is not the culprit, at least not in the way these men believe. The deaths, the disappearances, the whispered curse, they are but smoke. The fire lies elsewhere." His words, soft though they were, cut through the silence of the room. I leaned forward. "You mean the relic is harmless?" He shook his head slowly. "Not harmless. Its history carries weight. Its shape inspires awe. Its legend can strike terror into a weak mind. But an object, no matter how ancient, does not strangle men in alleyways or silence them in their sleep. No, Watson, these acts require hands. Hands driven by ambition, desperation, or perhaps revenge. At that moment, the bell at our door rang. Mrs. Hudson, ever patient, shuffled up the stairs to announce a visitor. To our surprise, it was Inspector Lestrade, his thin frame wrapped in a heavy coat and his face drawn with both fatigue and anxiety. "Holmes," he began without ceremony, "we've another body. This time, in the East End. A dockworker by the name of Francis Hargrove, strangled in the dead of night, left beneath the gaslight with a strange mark carved upon his chest." Holmes's eyes sharpened. "The same mark described on Sir Reginald's corpse?" "Aye," Lestrade nodded grimly. "The same. Looks like a crude spear, drawn with the tip of a blade." I felt my blood run cold. A symbol, a sign left for us, taunting in its clarity. Holmes rose at once, his coat already in hand. "Come, Watson. The game advances, and the night will not wait for us." The streets of Whitechapel were alive with their usual midnight chorus. Drunken voices, the shuffle of boots, the distant rattle of carriage wheels over cobblestone. We followed Lestrade through the maze of alleys until we reached the crime scene. The body lay slumped against a damp brick wall, his eyes still open, frozen in an expression of terror. The mark upon his chest glistened faintly in the lantern light. Holmes crouched near the body, his fingers hovering above the carved wound without touching. "Too precise," he murmured. "The lines are deliberate, not frantic. This is no act of rage, it is ritual." His gaze lifted to the shadows, his nostrils flaring as if to draw in the atmosphere itself. "Note the boots, Watson. Heavy, worn, yet the soles lack mud despite the rain earlier tonight. And see here, the fibers on his sleeve. A thread, foreign, not of a dockworker's cloth." He carefully plucked a strand and held it to the light. "Silk, black silk." We followed Holmes's deductions to a nearby warehouse, its doors locked, its windows sealed. Yet from within came the faintest echo of movement, as though men were shifting heavy objects in the dark. Holmes signaled us to silence. He approached the side of the structure and crouched near a ventilation grate, pressing his ear close. I joined him, and together we listened. A voice carried faintly through the metal, harsh and commanding. "The spear must be prepared for transport. The Society expects it in Cairo before the month is out. And no more mistakes. Those who interfere meet the fate of the dock worker." Another voice answered, lower and anxious. "But Holmes, if he suspects," the leader silenced him with a hiss. "Then we end him, too." Holmes's eyes gleamed with fierce satisfaction. He rose and whispered, "You hear it, Watson? A society. A network. This is no curse. This is smuggling, murder, and betrayal under the cloak of superstition. And they fear my name. That is their undoing." Lestrade signaled to his men, but Holmes shook his head sharply. "Not yet. To strike now is to scatter rats in the dark. We must follow them to the nest." For hours we shadowed the men who left the warehouse, cloaked figures slipping through the fog, carrying with them a long crate bound in chains. The crate's weight demanded 2 men to carry it, and with every step, its iron edges scraped against the cobbles. I knew, without doubt, that within lay the Ebony Spear. We trailed them through twisting lanes until they reached the Thames, where a waiting barge rocked gently against the wharf. Holmes laid a hand upon my shoulder. "Observe, Watson. The spear is not merely stolen treasure. It is currency. It is power. They mean to sell it to those who deal in shadows." But before the barge could depart, a new figure appeared. A man cloaked in white, his face hidden by a hood, stepped from the mist and confronted the smugglers. His voice rang clear. "You fools, the spear belongs not to you, not to Cairo, not to any empire. It belongs to the Brotherhood, and to the Brotherhood it shall return." The smugglers froze, their grip faltering. The leader snarled, drawing a revolver. "You dare defy me?" Yet before he could fire, The cloaked man produced a blade of his own, swift as lightning. A scuffle erupted, violent and swift, the crate nearly toppling into the river. We could intervene no longer. Lestrade ordered his men forward, and chaos exploded along the dock. Shots rang out, fists struck, the barge rocked dangerously under the struggle. I saw Holmes dash forward, seizing the crate as it began to slip into the Thames. His thin frame strained, yet he held it steady, shouting for assistance. Together we dragged the cursed relic to safety, even as the hooded man fled into the fog. With a cry that chilled me to my bones. The curse is real. You cannot escape it. The fight left 2 smugglers dead, the rest taken in chains by Lestrade's men. Yet the spear remained with us, its ebony surface gleaming faintly even in the dim lantern light. Holmes stood over it, his chest heaving from the effort, his face unreadable. "Watson," he murmured at last, "we have not ended the curse. We have only peeled back the first veil of its shadow. There is betrayal still deeper than this. The true puppeteer has yet to reveal himself." The fog thickened, swallowing the riverbank. The night seemed colder than before, heavier. And though we returned to Baker Street with the spear in our possession, I could not shake the echo of that cloaked man's cry. The curse is real. Chapter 5: Shadows of the Past. The firelight in Baker Street flickered gently across Holmes's sharp profile, the light glinting against his eyes as he leaned back in his chair, steepling his long fingers. For hours we had pored over the last fragments of evidence, unraveling the threads of deception that had nearly cost several lives. The ebony spear lay across Holmes's desk, wrapped in a coarse length of canvas, as though even touching it bare might allow its curse to seep into one's soul. The storm that had haunted London for days had cleared at last, yet the air carried the heavy stillness of unfinished business. I had been Holmes's companion long enough to know that though a villain may be in custody, the story is never over until Holmes says it is. The prisoner sat in Newgate under the charge of attempted murder and conspiracy, and the police congratulated themselves on their swift action. Yet Holmes remained unsatisfied. "The spear is but a symbol, Watson," he remarked at last, breaking a silence that had stretched too long. "The truth behind its curse is older than any London street and more dangerous than any single man." His tone was reflective, almost grim. He spoke of greed that disguises itself as superstition and ambition that hides behind whispered legends. The ebony spear had passed through centuries of hands, kings, generals, priests, and thieves, always bringing ruin when wielded with selfish intent. Now, even in modern London, the pattern had repeated, binding the ancient world to the present day. Today, as Holmes spoke, the weight of it all became clear. The conspiracy had not been a matter of simple murder or theft. It had been about control, about harnessing the fear the relic inspired, using it as a weapon to manipulate men of influence. The one we had captured had not acted alone, Holmes insisted. There were others, silent watchers in the fog, waiting for their moment to claim the spear for themselves. "It will not end here," Holmes warned, his eyes dark as the London night. "We have disrupted their plans, yes, but the lure of power is strong. The curse, Watson, is not in the wood or metal of this spear. It is in the hearts of men." The following morning, Holmes took decisive action. We traveled together, the package in hand, to the halls of the British Museum. The curator, a grave man with tired eyes, received the spear with trembling hands. His gratitude was mixed with fear, for he knew well the stories that surrounded it. Holmes's instructions were clear. The spear was to be locked away, studied, with care but never displayed, its history recorded without fanfare. "The fewer eyes upon it, the better," Holmes said sternly. "Objects of power are magnets for corruption." I could see in the curator's expression that he understood. It was not just a relic. It was a temptation, one that had nearly consumed our city. That night, We sat once more in our familiar chairs by the hearth, the case finally closed. Holmes smoked his pipe in silence, while I wrote the last notes of my account. Outside, London moved on, unaware of how close it had come to bloodshed over a relic of shadow and bone. Yet as I looked across at Holmes, I could see that his thoughts were not on victory, but on vigilance. He understood what so few did, that evil rarely dies, it merely shifts its shape, waiting for its next chance. "Watson," he said quietly, "there will always be another spear, another curse, another shadow cast over men's hearts. And when it comes, we must be ready." His words carried a chill deeper than the fog of London streets, for I knew he was right. The spear was gone, but its curse, the human hunger for power, remained eternal. So ended the case of the Ebony Spear. A tale of greed cloaked as superstition, of darkness that crept through corridors both ancient and modern. And though the relic now lay locked away, silent and unseen, I could not shake the feeling that somewhere, someone else was already plotting to reclaim it. Perhaps not today, perhaps not tomorrow, but the story of the spear would never truly be over. For as long as there is ambition in the world, there will always be curses, whether carved in ancient wood or whispered in modern halls. And if you have walked with us through this mystery, felt the chill of the fog and the weight of its secrets, then you too understand what Holmes meant. Evil is never banished. It is only delayed. And so, the game is never truly done. If you enjoyed this mystery and want to continue unraveling the shadows of Sherlock Holmes's world, make sure to stay with us here. More untold cases, more haunting puzzles, and more journeys into the unknown await. Subscribe, follow, and keep the lantern burning, for the fog hides many secrets, and this is only the beginning.